So welcome to the latest Recite Me webinar. This webinar will deep dive into the fundamentals of website accessibility and compliance within the public sector. Before we get started, we'll just run through some housekeeping. As you can notice, everyone's on mute to stop any background noise. To enable live captioning, please click the live transcript button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and then click Show Subtitles. Any questions anyone has, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We'll collect these all together and the panelists can go over them at the end. If you do have any technical problems or if you have trouble hearing us, please just message us in the chat and the team will be more willing to help you. The webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, so you'll be able to send it over to you guys and also you'll be able to access it at your own free will. Thank you very much. So before we start diving in, let's get a round of introductions from our panelists. Avneet, if we can start with you, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Avneet Jagpal. I'm the accessibility specialist here at Recite Me.
Who's next?
Good afternoon. My name is John Abbott. I'm head of product at Recite Me, and I look after our full product portfolio.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Maguire. I'm a digital adoption analyst at South Staffordshire District Council. Perfect,
thank you. So a little bit of a brief introduction before we hear from our panelists. In today's webinar, we're going to dive into the public body's mobile and website and mobile device accessibility regulations in 2018. This will mandate web accessibility requirements for public sector organisations. We will also explore the importance of offering an inclusive online experience that meets the diverse needs of your communities, including those who are neurodivergent, the elderly, or people who speak English as a second language. You will also learn some common accessibility issues on public sector websites, and more importantly, how to fix them to get you started straight away. Before we dive into the regulations and how we can help, let's get everyone thinking of a couple of questions. So poll number 1, on average, how many accessibility errors do public sector websites normally have? 5.1, 7.1, or 9.1? How many accessibility errors do public sector web pages have? So yes, 55% of people are correct. That's right. 9 errors on average on website pages, errors from alt text to color contrasts and beyond, something that Avneet and John will touch on as well. A second poll to get us thinking. How much more likely are disabled people to face barriers accessing services online? So we'll have a look at the answers for that. So you would maybe think it was high as 80, but the actual answer is 50%, so half people access barriers. So with the regulations being in place since 2018, improvements have been made, but not as much as needed for via law. But 50% of people do access issues when coming onto websites. So to get started, we're going to hand over Avneet, where she can run through accessibility laws, the impact and the importance, and how this applies to public sector organisations. And I'll share my screen also.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be talking a bit about website accessibility and compliance in the public sector. So before we dig deeper, just a brief outline of what I'm going to be discussing. So what is accessibility, the importance of accessibility, accessibility barriers faced online, accessibility guidelines in the public sector body, accessibility guidelines specifically touching base on WCAG 2.2. Before I start, I would like to draw everybody's attention to the specific quote here. Accessible first is a cultural as much as a compliance need. So when we look at accessibility, I always like to look at it in two parts. So one is cultural and one is compliance. You need to make sure your organization is looking at diversity and inclusivity together, as well as looking on the contrary on your compliance, which is abiding by guides such as the Public Sector Bodies Act, as well as WCAG 2.2. Next, what is website accessibility? So in a nutshell, the accessibility basically means making everything as easy as possible for our users to use. When I say that, you must be accommodating for a variety set of users who may be coming from different walks of life. But when we look at accessibility, we need to make sure we are catering to needs of all. Content also should be created regardless of any accessibility barriers or any impairments or any disability. In a nutshell, what we're trying to deliver is creating a social inclusion environment whilst we deliver our services, while what they might be online or mobile-based. Next is the importance of accessibility. So now you may say, why accessibility? So 1 in 6 people have a disability, which is a huge stat. And when we look at creating our services and we want to deliver in the most accessible way as possible, we need to accommodate for everybody. I'd like to draw your attention to the 3 images below. So you've got somebody that has a permanent disability, somebody that has a temporary disability, or somebody that might have a situational disability. So for example, a situational disability might be somebody that might be in a noisy environment, or simply you're at a place where you cannot listen out loud to a video. So what would be the best solution here? The first and foremost solution would be that video should be correctly captioned. When you've got the correct caption, you're abiding and you're allowing that person to come over and counteract their situational impairment. Again, secondly, somebody that might have a permanent disability, for example, a visual impairment, we've got screen readers for them. You need to make sure your website is fully accessible for the user in terms of setting the correct means. And lastly, you've got your temporary disability. So you need to cater for example, you need to set the keyboard navigation to be correct. So somebody that might have a temporary injury can also access your service. So all in all, we're catering to, again, to people from all walks of life. And then next, I'm going to be touching base around the accessibility barriers faced online. Like previously mentioned, you've got 4 categories that we look on. So impaired vision, motor difficulties, cognitive impairments or learning disabilities, and lastly, deafness or impaired hearing. So the first one is vision. Screen reader and are the main users that have the difficulty here. And for deafness, we correctly assign captions. And lastly, for motor, you also need to make sure that your website is accessible via the keyboard. Your screen reader is correctly reading out your website as well. Next, I'm going to be touching base on the Act itself. So the accessibility guidelines. The first one is the Public Sector Bodies Website and Mobile Application Accessibility Regulation. This came into picture in the UK on the 23rd of September in 2019. Now, when we talk about this regulation, we need to make sure that we're touching base with our foundations, which are our WCAG 2.2 guidelines, in order to make sure that we are correctly creating our services. So this is not only focused on your public sector websites, it is also based on your mobile applications. And in order to meet these, you need to comply with WCAG 2.2, which I am going to be touching base on next. WCAG 2.2. So the latest guidelines are WCAG 2.2, which are based on the 3 compliancy levels, where you have level A, AA, and AAA. And now you may ask, what is the 4 main basic design principles of WCAG 2.2? The first one is perceivable, the second one is operable, and the third one is understandable, and the fourth one is robust. Perceivable basically means you should be able to perceive your information in the most simplest form as possible. A quick example I could give you here is, so making sure your images have the correct alt tagging. For example, for a screen reader to correctly perceive that information and gain the best and optimum user experience. Secondly, operable, you need to make sure that your information that you're providing can be easily navigated by a keyboard user. So if we look back at one of the examples I gave was around a permanent disability. So somebody that has a permanent disability would be falling under the operable criteria, and you need to make sure that what you're designing is based on that specific criteria. Thirdly, understandable. So any service that you're delivering should be in the most simplest and easiest form for a user to understand. And then lastly, it should be robust so that all of your services could be accessed through assistive technology, and they shouldn't be dependent on any browser that the users open the specific service on, or any mobile application. So in a nutshell, you're again covering each and every person, and you're not missing or excluding anybody in terms of their limitations. And next, John would be touching base on WCAG 2.2.
Okay, so thank you, Avneet, and hello, everybody. Yes, I'm John. I'm head of product at Recite, and it's amazing to see so many people on this webinar because we love talking about accessibility, and usually we get to talk to ourselves about it. So to be able to spread a bit more information, is really good for us. We assume no knowledge of things like WCAG and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines because they are quite comprehensive, but most organizations we work with tend to be targeting WCAG, what's called 2.1 standard, which has been the incumbent standard for the past 4 or 5 years. And in October of last year, those standards were updated to be WCAG 2.2, which introduces a whole new set of interesting things to get into. So we'll run through a couple of those in terms of what's new in WCAG 2.2. So 2.2 includes things like mobile accessibility tests. So we're trying to ensure that all the functionality and all the content is accessible and usable on mobile devices, not just your main desktop website. And also verifying things like touch interfaces to make sure they're properly supported and usable with things like minimum touch size. We can't assume that everybody has the same size fingers. So it makes sense to cover those things off in your design guidelines, and also to check things like inputs. So where you have form fields and making sure that they're accessible as much on a mobile as they are on a desktop. And a really common example of that is where if you're filling in a form for email address, for example, and you put the word email address, but it's not actually next to the form. Sometimes when a website scales down, those two things become disconnected and you lose that context of what the field is. So always worth checking those. Cognitive and learning disability tests. This is about evaluating content for clarity and simplicity and ease of understanding, as well as things like making sure the navigation is very easy to understand and the forms are very easy to fill in, especially for users with cognitive disabilities. WCAG 2.2 asks that if you have things like help chat functions, that they should be displayed all the way throughout the experience and not just on the homepage. So we give people the help they need in context. There are also things for low vision and blind users to look at things like text size and spacing and contrast, and also enhancing the visibility, what we call focus indicators. So when if you're using a tab function to get around a screen, it will help show you where you are on the screen so that you always know information you're looking at. I'll rattle through the rest. Alternative input methods. These are things like voice commands or switches. Not everybody can see a website, and not everybody uses a keyboard or a mouse. So WCAG 2.2 nicely extends that out to more people. And cross-device accessibility testing is introducing more requirements across more platforms. So people use smart TVs, wearable devices, and lots of emerging technologies. So we want to make sure they're as accessible as possible too. So we work with a lot of public sector clients, which is quite exciting, and we get to see a lot of the challenges they face in terms of accessibility issues. So we've tried to boil it down to the top 5. And number 1 on that list is lack of what we call alt text. So some of you will know this from the WCAG standards, but users who use things like screen readers can't actually see the image that's presented on a website, but there are ways through code to be able to provide descriptions that can be read out by screen readers. For most web developers, it's a very simple fix, but it suddenly opens up something like the instructions to the hospital car park, for example. If that's just an image, and there's no alternative way to access that image, a large proportion of users can't actually use that. So alt text, super important. Inaccessible forms. Most people like to collect information on websites, but if they're not coded correctly, it's difficult for keyboard users and screen reader users to be able to fill in those forms successfully. So there's a very standard HTML format to do that, super simple. Poor color contrast. I put two examples at the bottom there from the NHS England guidelines. The one on the left, if you try and read what should say NHS Foundation Trust, it's a little bit difficult to get to, where the one on the right has much better color contrast, and WCAG sets those minimum color contrasts and helps you to be able to distinguish foreground colors from background colors for maximum readability. Unstructured content is things like what order your page is in and how quickly could somebody skip to the end if 90% of your content is not useful for them. So there are quite good conventions to be able to do that in terms of heading structures and being able to structure your page correctly so that you can skip the boring bits and get to just the bit you need. And the last bit is non-keyboard accessible menus. You wouldn't believe how many websites create their menus just for hover actions that can only be triggered with a mouse. So if you're not using a mouse, of course, you can't hover over anything. So the best advice is to make sure that those menus can be accessible through a variety of means. But I get asked this a lot. If you could only fix one thing, and I recommend that you don't only fix one thing, you try and fix everything. But if it is only one thing, my best recommendation is to look at your complex navigation on your website. If the information is too complicated or not intuitive to be able to find, users are never going to be able to find the actual information, regardless of how accessible it is. So if they can't locate it, they'll never be able to consume it. So when you're talking to your web designers and your development teams, that navigation structure, making it as simple and as flat a structure as possible, really helps. And top tip for that is if you use your search box analytics and you look for what people are searching for in that box, you very quickly identify which are the pages that people can't naturally find just by navigating themselves. So very quickly, just some other common accessibility traps to avoid. Inaccessible multimedia content. Avneet mentioned it before about videos that don't have captions. If you can't hear, how would you be expected to be able to access that information, particularly if it is critical? Unclear link descriptions. Everybody's seen those click here or touch this button, which out of context means absolutely nothing if you're not able to see what's around that content. So making sure that you have proper descriptions for those links so that somebody knows what happens when they press that button. Automatic media playback. This is for people that have cognitive impairments or sensory sensitivities. And sometimes when videos just start automatically or sound comes on, it can be quite difficult for people to manage. So you want to make sure that people are in control of when those videos play and that they're able to turn them off if they need to. And last one is just non-responsive website design. So this is much less of a problem than it used to be. But just making sure that if you have a website, it should probably adapt to a range of devices. And that includes when people zoom right in and making sure that things like fonts scale nicely. So, of course, keeping on top of that sounds like a lot of things to have on your list. My top recommendation is to use an automated scanning tool. It's not a big surprise that we have one of those if you want it. The rather excellent Recite Me accessibility checker. which can help identify some of those really easy fixes around inaccessible forms and that sort of thing. But also not just the automated scanning, but also available if you're in any doubt, you can always use a checklist. And that will take you right from top to bottom of the things you need to look for. There's one I can highly recommend, put together by Avneet, which contains lots of great information on how to cover off those accessibility basics. And this is probably a good point to hand back over to Avneet.
Thank you, John. I'll be touching base next on the assistive toolbar and the accessibility checker. So when it comes to accessibility, obviously we need to look at providing diversity and inclusivity. They go hand in hand. And we've got two products that provide that cater for that. So you've got the accessibility checker. Firstly, accessibility checker that looks at the back-end accessible build, and the assistive toolbar looks at the front-end user experience. So accessibility checker would help you in the first instance by looking at and filtering out any errors that your website might have and help give you guidance around fixing them issues. Once you've made them fixes and your website is compliant to WCAG 2.1 AA, you can use the assistive toolbar that can be placed on your site, and it would help you have a better and inclusive experience for your users. Next, I'll be talking a little bit more about the checker itself. So the checker in a nutshell is displayed on the right-hand side here, where you can see when you run a scan of your domain, you would be given a findings breakdown, which would be talking about how many issues have been highlighted on your particular page. So it'll give you, for example, the WCAG criteria. As you can see, non-text content, and it fails for 1.1.1 single A. And once you click into that issue, you'll be able to see where to exactly go make that fix. It could be a simple fix as simply by adding alt text to your images or making sure your images are decorative. Once you've gone through each of the major fixes, you should be able to check your accessibility score, which is here in the right-hand side of the image. So as you can see, like I mentioned before, it's divided into 3 compliancy levels: A, AA, and AAA. So currently this domain is 37% AA compliant and 82% single A compliant. So in a nutshell, the checker gives you the outline of how much you're abiding to the WCAG standards and gives you a step-by-step help to fix your errors as well. So how do we do it? So firstly, you'll scan the page, you'll fix the issues, and then you can track your progress, like I said. And lastly, you should be able to get an accessibility report, which you can use and showcase and add to your accessibility roadmap. As we know, accessibility is constantly changing. So we've got WCAG 2.1, now we've got WCAG 2.2 coming. So this would be evidencing for that, and it will help you be on a journey for accessibility altogether. The assistive toolbar, like I said, comes in the next step. So once you've made all the fixes, gone through with the scan, you'll place your assistive toolbar. For any user that is coming to use your website, they'll be presented with this toolbar, which is divided into smaller sections, which creates a diverse and inclusive view for the user. To give an example, for example, if a user needs help with screen reader and translation, they can easily click the play, go back button or pause button. This basically reads out all of the content for the user. To give an example, so this might help somebody that's visually impaired. Obviously, you can't read the content, but when you've got a screen reader there, it'll read out to you what the headings on the page are. It'll make your navigation easier. It'll direct you to the links. And then next, we also have a second section, which allows you to customize your website based on your individual needs. So for example, you might have an elderly person that can't read a particular type of font. They can't read a font size that is too small. But with the assistive toolbar, you can cater the website, increase the font size, decrease the font size, just make it as much easy experience for the user to use. Next, we have the reading aid. So you've got our ruler, screen mask, dictionary, and magnifying glass. So back to the example, somebody that might have very low vision, they might need to use our magnifying glass. That will sort of allow them to have a zoom on the screen and read the content better and make their experience, again, easy And secondly, you have a screen mask. So a screen mask would focus on particular areas of the screen that allows it sort of cuts the background noise for some people, and it allows you to read particular content as you go down section by section. Thank you. That's everything from me. I'll pass back to Michael.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Diving into WCAG, I think everyone understands on the call that it is a complicated subject that needs to be unpicked with many layers to WCAG, but hopefully we've helped you a little bit there with some further information. Most importantly now, I want to hear firsthand of what this is like and what a public sector organisation is doing to help their community. And Rachel, it'll be great to hear from you and what you guys are doing.
Michael. Hi everybody. So like I said earlier, I'm from South Staffordshire District Council. So it was just in March last year, actually, we launched a brand new website and we launched the Recite Me toolbar alongside that. So I just want to tell you a bit about how we got along with that. So within the council, providing an inclusive experience for our residents and customers is at the very top of our priority list. Our ethos here is all about making it easy for residents to contact us, but for them to contact us in a way that's convenient for them. And in doing that, we need to make sure that the experience on every contact channel is consistent and equally as accessible, no matter how they choose to get in touch with us. So we're working at the moment on multiple projects on opening up as many contact channels as possible, and that's to give the freedom to customers to choose how they do the business with us. I know channel shift has been a hot topic for a number of years in public sector organisations, but we're very clear with our residents that it's not about forcing them down digital routes. It's more about the natural channel shift that comes from providing multiple high quality options to contact us. So by opening up the routes on our website with the toolbar to help for those high volume, low complexity queries, we're giving capacity on other channels and other routes for the more vulnerable residents with the more complex queries to access us through like face-to-face and over the phone. And by removing the barriers for those with disabilities, learning difficulties, visual impairments, English as a second language, we're giving those groups of people even more choice over how they can interact with us, which is definitely something we're committed to doing here at South Staffs. Breaking down the digital barriers is a constant piece of work for us at South Staffs and something we're always working on. So we have an ageing population in our district, and we find there's a lot of nervousness and reluctance towards digital solutions, online forms, those sort of things. So the Recite Me toolbar has been such a huge step forward for us to help in breaking down those digital barriers for our residents. The opportunity for them to personalize how they use the website, to make it more accessible for them, has removed a lot of the frustration that people with visual impairments or learning difficulties, for example, often used to feel when trying to use our online services. So just after lockdown, we opened up our brand new community hub here in Codsall, where we're based. And our original approach with that was to not have any face-to-face services anymore, continue with the online and the telephone as we'd done in lockdown. Residents had coped okay with that. But when we opened the hub, it quickly became apparent that there was still a demand for the face-to-face services. And we were quite fast to react to that, and we reintroduced what we call now the Hub Welcome Host. And that role is really key for us, breaking down the digital barriers with our residents. There's a friendly face that's there who's going to take some time to sit down and help them. And yes, it might be that we complete tasks on their behalf, but there's also plenty of opportunities for our staff there to use the toolbar to showcase it to residents and to signpost them so they can complete those digital tasks independently in the future. We've recently had families from Ukraine moving into South Staffs, and the figures on our toolbar usage shows that they're making really good use of the language translation and the screen reader. So that's something that our housing and welfare teams are continuing to promote with new families that are moving into the district from abroad. And they really love that functionality. I've been contacted this week by our council tax and our benefits teams to explore implementing the toolbar onto our online portal. So that will then expand that functionality and help residents to complete any benefits application forms, and also enable them to manage their accounts online in an accessible way, which is something they might not be able to do at the moment. So I've also recently taken on a new role in addition to my current one here at work, and I've taken on the role of a digital enabler. So my sole focus is now working on breaking down barriers for residents who are digitally excluded. So I'm often out and about in the district. I work with our parish councils, councillors, and lots of local community groups and volunteers to help them with all things digital and to help those that are being excluded. So it might just be that I sit down, I show them the website, I show them the toolbar and help them along with understanding that it's not as scary as it might appear to be. And we've got some things in place to make it more inclusive for them. And we're also looking at ways that we could recycle our council laptops, our staff laptops, and donate them back into the community for those, again, that are digitally excluded. So we're doing a lot around digital exclusion in the council. And the Recite Me toolbar has been amazing to help us support the residents. So I got the stats the other day for the last 12 months of the toolbar, and they were great. So we've now supported just under 9,000 people in the last 12 months have used the toolbar, and they've viewed just under 32,000 pages on our website using all of the elements of the toolbar. The screen reader seems to be the most popular functionality. But there's also demand for people with the styling changes, so they're increasing the font, using the margins, and changing the pages into just text only, and removing any media and videos and pictures. Like, I know I've already mentioned our Ukrainian families living in the district, but they are the second highest user of our screen reader and translation services on the toolbar. So it's certainly making a difference to help them settle into the district and to find the support they need on our website. And we, as I said earlier, we get a lot of residents coming into our community hub now for help filling in online forms. And that's not something we initially launched the toolbar on, because we're undergoing a project at the moment, but we've since released those forms. And we've just also launched Recite Me onto those forms as well. So we can help residents to fill in those forms, but it also, the feedback we've had is that it's given residents some independence back. It allows them to self-serve and to do things themselves online now where they wouldn't have been able to before. So we've really loved having the toolbar, and it's been a great asset for us as a council.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Rachel. I think obviously not just the toolbar, but other things that you're doing to help the community or residents is coming together. And it might be that one-to-one approach first, but you're providing the support to them for them to then be self-sustainable and be able to do things on their own online. I think that was fantastic. And translations is a huge part. Something that we think with disabilities and accessibility, you think around people like my good self who's dyslexic or neurodivergent or elderly. Language is another thing that some people miss out, but it's vitally important, especially in the public sector, to get important messages, even just to put the bins out, even, how to navigate to that important page, that the information they want at that time. So I think that's fantastic that to hear that the translation side is also helping. This actually comes into one of the questions I've seen as well, that we'll jump on the questions, is when talking about accessibility compliance, does this include features in the website to enlarge text, change color backgrounds? Is this a requirement by law, or is it just good practice? I think it is the best practice, but I think from what you've said there, Rachel, it's a must.
Yeah, it seems to be a must for us. Residents are using it a lot. My son's dyslexic, and when we implemented our website, we did a lot of user testing with elderly residents, but we found out that we weren't aware of the national reading age in the UK is just 9 years old.
Yeah.
So we got in a group of 9-year-olds and asked them to test our website. But as part of that, my son with dyslexia tested the Recite Me, and the difference it made to how he interacted and was able to find the right information was huge.
It's amazing. That's great. I think when I was younger, and I know our CEO Ross as well, who's dyslexic, that's the reason why Recite Me was born. There was no support when we were younger. So be able to hear that the toolbar's helping, and then obviously that into education and schools is puts a smile on your face that it can really does help people. Another question that we had was where organisations refuse to offer websites that are accessible. Where do we report these issues? I know maybe John and Avneet might be able to help on this one. I think going to the actual council or the organisations is the first protocol. But is anything else beyond that?
You can. Oh,
Avneet.
sorry, no worries. You can raise it with gov.uk. I'll share the link in chat, and you can fill out a form and mention any particular issue you're having, or if somebody's been difficult or they're not willing to provide it in an accessible form, they should be able to help you. I'll paste the link into chat now.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much.
I was just going to add to that that first port of call is should be definitely for public sector. Is look for the accessibility statement. There should be on there some either a contact name or a responsible person, and that's definitely the first port of call, because they should have an escalation process, even if it isn't clear from the outset. So I'd always try that first. You may get a quicker response, and if that doesn't work, absolutely the gov.uk.
Perfect. Thank you. Do anybody else have any questions? I know a lot of people have been asking around about copies of the slides and extra information. What we'll do is we will follow up with everyone on this call and who signed up to the webinar with a recording, the slides, and I'll even try and get Avneet's checklist offer, and hopefully we'll be able to share that with you guys as well. I think that'll be really valuable on your journey towards an accessible website and also an inclusive experience, which is very important. And I'll just quickly check the Q&A in the chat to see if there's anything else that's come through. I think that slides being recorded, reporting breaches, best practice around accessibility support. I think they're the questions I can see. Is there anything? So before we head off, I'd like to leave everyone with a takeaway, something that we can do from our panelists. So John, are you okay to fire first?
So I'm a pragmatist, and I work with a lot of website owners who are trying to start that journey, making their websites accessible. And usually the biggest problem they've got is landscape. There's just so much of the website that's grown organically over time. There's more sections have been added, and more documents and more PDFs have been added and that sort of thing. My best advice, if you're involved in a project, is to be ruthless and to cull as much of that digital landscape as possible to bring it right down to something that's super targeted to the audience you've got, and it makes it much easier to monitor just a smaller digital real estate for accessibility. So yes, I'd recommend you do. Everybody does themselves a favor by doing a big audit and a cull of as much of your website as possible, so what you're left with is very meaningful and easy to access for everybody.
Thank you, John. Avneet?
I think the one key thing I would like to add is when it comes to accessibility, it's always an afterthought, and it's considered in the later stages as opposed to the early stages of your product or your project planning, I would say. So I would say start thinking early. So look at accessibility in your design phase and then slowly move through each phase, so that when you're releasing your product, it's in the most accessible form as possible. And you're definitely complying with the public sector bodies regulation as well as WCAG 2.2. So just keep accessibility in your heads from the start, I would say. And also think about how your role would sort of tie in with accessibility. And I know that not everybody is from the same walks of life when it comes to understanding of accessibility. Just think how your role might be tailor-made for accessibility. So to just like provide a most unique experience for the end users.
Thank you very much. And Rachel?
I think for me, there's a lot of many people think that having some software is the end of it, and that they've achieved what they need to achieve, and that's not it. That's probably not even the start or the middle of your journey. It's about finding those people that will benefit from it, showcasing and making them aware of what you've put in place and how they can use it to help them. So that's been the biggest thing for us, and that I would ask other people to do.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. I've just seen one last question come. Usually we end the webinar there, but I think it's really important. It's putting Recite Me on the spot a little bit, but I think we love these questions to provide clarity. And I think Rachel's done a great job of answering it already, but we'll put a little bit more meat on the bones, if you like. From someone from the audience, I'm in the process of discussing Recite Me with our IT department, and they said there's a question over whether it is actually needed for accessibility, as our website is assured to be and complies with AA accessibility standards. So I know a lot of people in our organization get this question, but John, the group, would you like to answer that?
I'd love to, because we get it so often. So short answer is the accessibility toolbar, the Recite Me toolbar was built as an inclusion tool. We don't make big claims about it making your website WCAG compliant, but what it does do is exactly what Rachel just described. It helps people personalize that content in a way that works for them, and in many ways it goes beyond the letter of the WCAG guidelines into areas that WCAG just hasn't evolved into yet. So if you want to buy the toolbar to make yourself WCAG compliant, that's not the way this works. You will still need to do all that WCAG work, and it sounds like you've already started on that, which is great. But we Avneet very briefly showed that equation about making sure that inclusion is part of that overall journey and not just accessibility. So we're covering it from two sides. Avoid things that promise you quick fixes. There are lots of adverts on the internet about things that will make you super accessible by a couple of lines of code. Avoid like the plague. Talk to experts in the subject matter, and if you need more convincing, or you need more case studies about how the tools work and how they help people and beyond the requirements of the WCAG guidelines, I'm sure most of the people on this call will be available and very happy to have a call with you.
Amazing, John. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think going back to what John was saying, there's two sides to the accessibility coin as we talk about how your website's built, and that has to be to WCAG 2.1 for regulations, then how a user uses your website. A lot of people don't have their own assistive technology, and then it goes beyond just people with disabilities who have their own technology. It goes against elderly people, it goes against different situational disabilities, it goes against language, and that becomes someone's experience, and that needs to be customized. And you can only do that with a suite of tools. So in hand, they create this inclusive online environment that hopefully as many people as possible be able to use your website in a way that works for them. That's amazing. Well, thank you very much for everyone for joining us today. Thank you for the panelists for sharing their knowledge and their experience. Much appreciated. We will email everyone, as said, with some contact details and some further information, Avneet's checklist. And we hope you have a fantastic day, and thank you for joining us. Take care, everyone.